Architectural delight. Oh, that's right. We're talking architecture. If talking about beauty is wrong, we don't want to be right. Eclectic, modernist, futuristic, guardian, cutting edge, rationalism, vernacular, visionary, pre-postmodern, romantic, invention, beauty, baby, beyond style, with your architect hosts, David Andriazzi, Elizabeth McNicholas, and Dan Morales. Architectural delight, baby. Yeah. Feel me? Oh, come on. Let's get it. Ow. Ooh. It's all here, folks. Look no further. Don't go anywhere. Right here, Architectural Delight.
Good afternoon. My name is David Andriozzi, along with my co-hosts Elizabeth McNicholas and Dan Morales. Three architects with three very different perspectives, all in search of a new narrative. We're here in support of the New England chapter of the Institute of Classical Architecture and Art, the ICAA, Traditional Building Magazine, and Residential Design Magazine. Thank you all. At Architectural Delight, we believe that buildings should speak to the places they are built, culturally and contextually, but most importantly, they should delight. We believe that regardless of style, cost, technique, people should tend to save their buildings when they love them the most. Without architectural delight, no building can truly be sustainable. Today, we're honored to spend some time with Catherine Forster Connolly, the owner and CEO of Merida Natural Rugs. Catherine has been the CEO of Merida for 15 years and purchased the company 7 years ago. During the time as tenure, Catherine has led the transformation of the company from an importer of high-end sisal to a design-driven textile company designing and manufacturing rugs right here in local Fall River, Mass. The mission of the company is to reimagine textile manufacturing in the United States based on original design, craftsmanship, and natural materials, which are better for environment. The remaining 90% of the rugs, realizing that 90% of the rugs that exist today are made with plastic. Merida was reinvented when Catherine took over the company and started with a mission to be a countercultural company that reimagines textiles as art. They are committed to rediscover and reinvent the equation of how products are made, celebrate the nobility of craftsmanship, the beauty of natural materials, and the sustaining joy that connects the maker and the receiver. Architectural Delight and Merida have a common ethos to celebrate people and culture and everything around us. Respect it, honor it, celebrate it, be bound to its ideals as a responsibility to future generations. Before we start, I'm going to show you a very short little video to give you a better sense of Merida itself.
I never noticed that before. The most important thing for me is that we not lose the art of rug making. First of all, it's a connection to the past, to history, to archaeology, to religion, to everything. The other thing is, if you really want to achieve things that are extraordinary, you have to have the art and the craft and the hand. And the most important is you have to have the spirit of the maker. is about art, the art and making something exquisite and beautiful and celebrating the people who are making it. But when it becomes an economic thing, like how do I make this as efficiently and as cheaply as possible? You basically take the spirit out of it and it becomes a mathematical equation. If you take the art out and the soul out, then what do you have left?
Catherine, welcome.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here. David, Dan, and Elizabeth, I'm honored. And I love your video. It is fantastic.
There's just so much around us that we have to rediscover. And boy, you are certainly doing it. Your factory is just unbelievable. And I can't wait to start by sharing the story about where you were before you went down this path of finding this company, how you ended up there, and then really how you pivoted and said, I want to look at manufacturing a different way.
Okay, I'll try to make this super quick.
No.
Yeah, I studied economics, went to graduate school. My dream job was to become the Secretary of State. So I'm close, but I took a little left turn and had been running a market research company in the high-tech space. And really a friend, this was his family's business, just said, oh, could you come help Merida for a little while? And I was like, oh, no, I don't know anything about carpet for sure. But he said, well, just help me do a little market research, which I did. Anyway, serendipity, one thing led to another, but he asked me as a favor to come run the company for a few months while he was gone. And I literally fell in love. I fell in love with the people. I never met such interesting, diverse, committed people and it was really the spirit of the people. So I said, yes, I'll come run your beautiful company, but you have to let me make a lot of changes. And this was back in 2008, as many of you might remember. So we were right on the precipice of disaster. But even before that, I remember the first thing I made everybody in the company read was a little book called Our Iceberg is Melting. It was a little fable. But I was like, okay, with all the knockoffs from China coming, we had no brand. I was like, we're never going to survive. But it had been such a successful company for so long that everyone was like, no, Catherine, we're fine. And I'm like, we're really not fine. So anyway, that was the beginning of a journey that's kind of inch by inch led us to where we are now. So that's the short version.
It's like, so you're at this moment in 2008, and that was like, oh my God, what a terrible moment. And so, but I'm going to make this pivot to rethink about everything. I mean, the material, first of all, you changed from, again, sisals to manufacturing carpetings, but then everything, the materials and where it's coming from, and it was just such an aggressive play.
Yeah, yeah, sometimes it feels super aggressive and it takes your breath away, and other times it feels like we're moving slow as molasses. But I would say the first thing though, and part of the reason the two commitments that I really drew me to Merida were this absolute commitment to only using natural materials, no chemicals, no toxins, nothing. And I don't think I really appreciated how great of a commitment that was when I first joined, but I thought it was terrific. And then the second is just that people are everything. And there was always a commitment to the team here and a respect for the team. And I just loved it. And I felt like that's why the spirit was so strong here. So even just with those two commitments, we started, you had to make choices. So in 2007, we sold through 6,000 carpet dealers in the United States with no brand, sisal. And 40% of our business went away overnight, in the recession, just like that. And then a friend, an advisor said, well, Catherine, don't let a good recession go to waste. And I was thinking, I'm like stressed out to the max. I'm like, what are you talking about? But that's when we said, well, what if we took this dream of natural materials a little further and we started to actually, make, not just finish rugs here, but make them. And we had a few looms that we had used, but it was a little bit more of a hobby. So we just started, and we started with this little sweater collection that was 2 rugs in white. Mm-hmm. And we were like, okay, let's see. And we sold, a fair amount. So we're like, okay. So it was like baby steps, So that we started down that path. And then the other path we were on is first trying to just build a brand and still sell through the carpet dealers. But then they were also struggling post-recession. And, for them, there was a lot of cheaper stuff coming from other places. And I understood they're trying to grow their businesses. But so I was like, I have to somehow get to people and tell them what we're trying to do, i.e. designers and architects directly. And so that was the biggest thing, is we really started to shift our business away from a wholesale model to a direct, to not really to consumers, because we're direct to the trade. But so that was the first big move. And that move did take my breath away. How about that? That move was really hard. Really hard.
One of the things that you mentioned is when you grab something that you've made in your family, I'm going to say your family, your team has made, and it's natural and it's been made by hand, there's just something special about it that just comes from it. And I believe that with all craft and all art. Explain how that adding to your team, the artistic team within your company, which is an amazing small team, meaning the designer and the core, and then your larger team. And then how do you extrapolate out to directly connecting with interior designers? And that's basically, I believe, how the majority of your things are sold now, and incorporating them in the path and connecting the client, that art to the client. That was a lot of questions. I apologize, and I'll let Dan and Elizabeth take over at this point.
So you're basically just saying maybe break down a little bit of the process from like inspiration.
Yeah, it's that art. It's the art. It's like there's something in the art. It starts with your core team, your designer, and then it's the art of the fabric, but then it's the people in your factory. And then it's out to the interior designer, all as one team, and then it gets to the client. It's just an amazing path.
Yeah, and if I could just back up for a second, to be honest, when we first started making those little sweater rugs, we were really doing. I always think about this expression in the South where I grew up, like putting lipstick on the pig. So, we were doing what we knew, broadloom, but, using really nice materials. But I had this dream, and I even put, when I was thinking about this conversation, I'll go ahead and call it a flimsy dream, but it was a dream that we could really ennoble craftsmanship. And so I'm going to start with the workshop. But the work that we were doing was good work, but it was pretty basic work. It was, our patterns were mostly surface design. They were 1, maximum 2 yarns, beautiful yarns. And we started down a path of trying to create a path from like apprentice to master craftsman. And we started but even our now master craftsmen, in their own nice way, we're like, Catherine, we're not really doing anything so hard that we would actually get to master craftsman. It's not, we appreciate that you want to do this, but it's, and even in the marketplace, we were really working on, we have these beautiful rugs. We care about the environment. I think, Dan, we talked about this. I think I was probably really preachy. Like, of course, everyone will want to help the environment. Anyway, that didn't really go over so well, which I understand. But so then I started to be like, okay, what's it going to take to really ennoble craftsmanship and be able to build master craftsmen, like legitimately? do something that's really hard, that requires years of practice, right? That's what they were saying to me. To be a master at something, it can't just be something that's you can do, but you can pick up pretty quickly. So this was about 5 years ago. I realized, I was like, maybe this is true for all manufacturing in the United States, but I was like, the only way to survive here is you have to do something extraordinary. And I mean, like really extraordinary. And, you know, I was like, okay, what we're doing is really good, but it's not extraordinary. And I'm not a weaver, so I'm like, I'm not sure exactly how we're going to do something extraordinary, but my flimsy dream is going to become less flimsy. And honestly, serendipitously, again, I ended up being introduced to Sylvie Johnson, who's our artistic director in Paris. And that's a funny story that I won't bore everyone with the details now, but she came over though, and she was like, and I remember I introduced her to our now master craftsman, John Carvalho, and he's really like great about like calling a spade a spade. So I was like, okay, John, what do you think really? And he goes, she's the real deal. I was like, okay, this is going to work. So, but one of the things Sylvie had said to me was, we're going to take textiles and this is an ancient conversation, and we're going to add to this conversation, and we're going to do really hard things. But you, Catherine, are going to have to invest. We've got to take 50% of our time and put it into research and development. And imagine, I was like, and then the kicker, she told me, she goes, we're going to have to spend $10,000 a year on books. I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, we have to study. We need to know what we're doing. We need to know the cultural references. We're going to really make it rigorous. So I'm like, okay. And I'll tell you, it has been nothing short of an odyssey. I think our team went into absolute shock the first year when she was here. She's rigorous, she's disciplined, she's all these things, but we started to work and push ourselves, and we started that career path started to become real, because it was like, okay, can we do this? Can we do that? Can we do this? It'd be like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And so we had our 5th collection come out in the fall. And I have to tell you, I realized it this summer. So we're 5 years in, and I was in the workshop, and I'm like a really, I rarely say things like we're doing something extraordinary, but I realized this summer, I'm like, we've crossed over the threshold. I was like, we're not even really a manufacturer. We're more of an artisan workshop. Like what they're doing now is truly extraordinary. Everyone's like, why didn't you start talking like this 4 years ago? I'm like, because to be honest, I knew we were doing something good and we were getting better, but you know, it's taken all this time and investment. So that's the long-winded story. So to answer your more specific question, it really starts with Sylvie. She's a weaver. She has her own fabric company. They do extraordinary fabrics by hand, but all by hand. And we have looms. So we're mixing hands and mechanical looms. So she starts in Paris, and she's got a 5-year plan. So she's, for example, this year, our collection's based on arte povera, movement and specific artists within that. But she started thinking about this 5 years ago. So she comes up with ideas, drawings, works with them by hand, sends them over to our design team here. They start to work on them. They start to think about different, so we're making our own yarns now. So we have 11 base yarns and we're applying them together. And then you try them and you do different combinations. So they work on them. Then they start to interact with the craftsmen. And it's just an iterative process. So all of our collections take about at least a year in development before they come out. So I don't know if I answered your question. Then to add the client piece to it, you know, we love working with interior designers because every rug is basically a one-off. So we're working with the designers to say, okay, maybe they want to change the scale a little bit. Maybe they want to change some of the motifs, but the basic construction and the yarns are set in place. But then each rug, I was just out an hour ago, it's just like magical. you see, you know that they're your rugs, but they look different for each project and how designers are combining them and putting their handprint on them. So I hope I answered your question.
You did very, very well. And you said, again, you're usually working directly out of the interior design warehouses. Do you have direct relationships with interior designers? And that's how each commission happens, correct?
Exactly. So yeah, we work with, our sales team basically is meeting with designers in their studios or they're coming in to, like, we have a few designers coming here tomorrow. So people will come to Fall River or into New York or Boston.
You raised this thing about the maker and at what point they get involved in the design process. Could you speak about how, once that design comes over from Paris and once the design team in Falls River's had a chance to digest it and all, how the maker begins to inform how that design ends up in the final product? In other words, while they're working on it?
Yeah. So it's tons of things. One, they'll start to, the craftsman will start to suggest different plies because they know the yarns really well. So, and then they'll start to work on different tensions, and then they'll work on even the design if they think it's, for example, there's on one of our looms, we have a 3-layer design, actually this rug behind me. And what that enables you to do is have 3 different motifs in play in one rug. So like this, you can't really see, but this one has circles, which are really hard to do. But they had to work forever to make sure that it was stable, because you have 3 different things. And so that alone took us like a year and so the craftsmen are the ones that know how to do that. Then there are other designs where our master craftsmen figured out we have a Dobby loom, which is just shuttles going up and down, but he figured out if he added 10 new shuttles, we could expand our ability to design different shapes. So he built them onto the loom itself. And so they're constantly kind of coming back with, whether it's the yarns or the construction or the actual loom tension, a lot of the mathematical part of weaving, I would say the craftsmen know very intuitively. And so we're, change, even, I would say, that's something that actually changes even when you do a one-off. Let's say we do a lot of huge rugs, let's say a 20 by 40, that it'll change the tension. And so the team will get back in. So it's almost like they're starting over, even though they're working off of an existing design.
Catherine, you share about how you rely so heavily now on your craftsmen that you've, invested all of this time in sort of in training up from apprentice to master. Where do you find the humans out there who are interested, to start at the apprentice level, who think this is a cool enough thing, since trade schools are so few and far in between? I imagine it's a big project, just sort of sourcing these humans that would be a great fit for the project of going from apprentice to craftsman.
Yes.
Master.
Well, the best thing for us is that we are in the cradle of textiles. As everyone in Fall River likes to say, in 1850, we were the Silicon Valley of the United States because of textiles. So there is so much talent in this general area. Hopefully someday there'll be more jobs than talent, but right now there's more talent than jobs. I think the hardest thing, to be honest, is convincing people that this is a stable career path, because many of them in some of our weavers too grew up in mills, but they all closed. And so I think, and yet this is what they love to do, but the thought of getting back involved and like, can manufacturing and weaving really exist in the United States? So convincing people that yes, it can, and it's a good thing to dedicate your career to. There are actually some really good technical schools around here as well that we've been, kind of making inroads with. So, but really our view is we really need to be doing a lot of that training here. So, but we hope we hope as we grow that it becomes a more viable and exciting opportunity. So, but it's definitely Fall River is full of fabulous talent. That's for sure.
That's fabulous. Now you have, I mean, at year 5, right? Effectively, you have proof of concept, essentially.
Yes.
As you know, but clearly you shared with us the Secretary of State sort of like aspiration in the younger years. I mean, is this, what now that you have sort of this thing established, and obviously it's your focus and your main charge, but besides talking to a few architects on a Thursday afternoon, are you involved, or do you have plans for sort of broadening the dissemination of the message about how this is doable? Working with
I certainly hope so. I absolutely hope so. I mean, that was part of the original flimsy dream, which does somewhat relate to my previous world, is could you really just be countercultural on a few levels, right? Certainly one is reimagining textiles as art. That's counterculture, but could you also, from a business perspective, be countercultural and not look at manufacturing or people as just inputs to be exploited, but rather people who, if nurtured, could really contribute in an outsized way, right? And, again, most people tell you no, flat out. I think I was sharing this flimsy dream with somebody early on at like a dinner party, and they're like, well, that's nice, you're running a charity. I'm like, no, I'm not running a charity. But so I hope, proof of concept to me would be that, this, and I'm super inspired by like Wendell Berry, and even for like how he talks about like a nurturer versus an exploiter. Exploiter is a strong word. Believe me, I'm a good capitalist, but so I'm not trying to use such a negative word. But if an exploiter says, "How do I just constantly make things more efficiently?" That's been the drumbeat, certainly of manufacturing. But the nurturer says, or according to him, how much carrying capacity does this have so that it will sustain itself indefinitely? And those are different questions. So part of my flimsy dream is that, yeah, you could do proof of concept, both textiles as art, but also just this spirit, like nurturing this spirit and thinking about carrying capacity and some of these things in work and life. So I hope we can prove that, yeah, there is, it's possible. It's another path. So
I like to ask about the design process. I mean, as a designer, I use books a lot, and I was fascinated to hear that this woman you work with in Paris ordered you to buy $10,000 worth of books in a year. And obviously, pretty pictures are always an influence, an impetus for a designer. But how do you all, how did you disseminate those $10,000 worth of books, a year or whatever, into the company? Like, is it just, in other words, is your design team sort of on its own little world, and they look at all the books, and then the makers, because I hear a lot of references to arts and crafts, and I'm not saying you try to revive the arts and crafts in any way, but there's a lot of similarities to their sort of moral and ethical approach to work. Can you speak to how your approach to design works, and does it filter into the morality of the product?
Yeah, I mean, I have a bunch of notes here too. I think the arts and crafts movement, I'm just thrilled that you see any connection, because we've studied it. We see a lot of, I think what they were trying to do was amazing. So is amazing. I live in an arts and crafts house, for example. So by coincidence, I guess, or not. But the books part is, well, I'll start with Sylvie. I've never met a more disciplined person. She studies for 1 hour every day, like, period. I'm like, oh, okay. And I'm a big reader. I think I'm disciplined, but I'm like, I can't say that I study for an hour a day for sure. But so she starts with kind of disseminating that down. But for example, this collection is on arte povera. So we've all, the whole company, the sales team, the design team, the workshop, we've been studying these artists. We've been studying, you know, so much of what they were trying to do, which is, I mean, there's a million things they were trying to do, but for example, breaking down the hierarchy between artisans and craftsmen, you know, and so I like to think that all of that is making its way into what we're doing. And again, I'm a big
sorry to interrupt, but do you book study? Do you like book club? Do you group study? Like, how is it that you study together?
Yeah, that is a great question. We probably have done a less good job studying together, but we have a lot of training meetings where we talk about the different influences on the art, but people are kind of reading on their own. We've you know, we've done a roundup of we've been encouraging everybody, go to galleries, go to exhibitions, so, you know, trying to find, do some of them online, for example. So there's some great, for example, interviews on YouTube about this guy, Giuseppe Pannone, who I'm obsessed with. So we do a lot of that. Like, but there's plenty more work that we could be doing. So book club's a good idea. For example.
I mean, would you say that you have a style or a range, or are you more a bespoke company? Like, in other words, when you think of your company's look, is there a certain kind of style you're after, or is it more a blend of craft and whatever aesthetics either come from the designer, come from the client? I mean, can you speak to your sort of aesthetic vision for the company or your designer's vision?
Yeah, and I mean, some of this goes back to arts and crafts too, but I would say simple and deep and Sylvie is so, and again, this cuts across many movements, but arte povera for sure, is letting the materials speak for themselves. And again, when you first start to talk to Sylvie, you're like, what are you talking about? Letting the yarn speak for itself, like what? But then you realize the way she's thinking about the plying in everything we're doing, she's trying to let the yarn breathe so that they're not, even if I'd made 2 rugs, the same design, they would appear slightly differently. We do a lot of, particularly recently, monochromatic rugs because there are 11 different yarns and the way they all take the dye is different. So it's the same color, but it's quite spectacular. I would argue that it's like our aesthetic is to be kind of a captivating, quietly captivating. So the idea of not huge surface design, but something that over time you're kind of appreciating at a different level the more time you spend with it. So subtle, certainly sophisticated. Deep though, like deep in terms of the construction, deep in terms of the way we're using the materials. Color wise, we try to really, we certainly have colors we introduce every year, but that's where we really like to work with the designer and then these rugs take on a whole different life, you know, as the designers kind of put their fingerprints on it, so to speak, through color and changing some of the scale. So
I'm hearing, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go.
Well, I'm just hearing that essentially, you know, the aesthetic appeal of your products is going to sort of lend them to be most appreciated by people with very refined eyes, right? On balance, would you say, you know, the people who are interested to invest, make the investment in this for themselves are, you know, more drawn, honestly, to sort of the aesthetics that you're able to achieve through these methods? Or is it the narrative, the story, the backstory, the, you know, feel good about, you know, being made in the USA effectively?
Well, that's such a good question. Of course, I started thinking, of course, everyone will want to buy because of the story. We have no toxins. It's made in the US. I feel like I've been 100% wrong. Like, I may just be a very bad storyteller, so I'll say that. But I finally just said, forget it. We just have to go with beauty. we have to go with like, it has to be so extraordinary and then all the other stuff is a nice to have because it's not compelling enough. The only thing I will say about the refined taste is I would say that that's true, except that you also have like the tactile experience. And I have yet to meet anybody, and I'm not sure everybody has such refined tastes, thinking of family members. It's so amazing to be in a room though, where some of these materials are there and you're sitting on them or you're feeling them under your feet. So I would say they're very appreciated, whether your tastes are refined or not, for all the qualities that they bring to a room. And again, I think even myself, you just don't realize that so much of our world is plastic. So you don't realize, we don't know what we're missing until you're in a space that is so rich and natural. And so I would say almost everybody comments on that, like when they're in the presence of the, any of these rugs actually. So
tactile experience must be connected sort of directly to your emotional brain, right? Rather than the rational brain. It has to be some sort of root primal.
Yeah, I think so
right?
too. I wish I had more research on that. I also find myself, like I'm obsessed with Denmark and Copenhagen, but that boogie idea, but I feel like there's something about the way it controls temperature too, like wool can pull some of the moisture out of it. There's something about it that also makes you feel very cozy or embraced or something. And I have no science on this whatsoever, but it's real. You do feel differently. So that's for another chapter of research for me.
I'd love to talk a little bit about, because it's such an important thing, about the cheap, the inexpensive properties of plastics, and basically you're not getting the beauty. It's the opposite. You've got this sort of inexpensive, inexpensive high profit margin rugs being given in plastic. And then on the other hand, what we're talking about is these handmade, lovable things made of natural fibers that have beauty, that become heirlooms. And there's so much to unpack there, because when you go through the process or you fall in love with a natural piece, I just think it's different. You're bonding something, you're thinking about giving it to a child, or you're going to be, it's going to be with you for the rest of your life. It's not fashion, it's
Right.
art. And so that the art and fashion, plastic and natural, there's just so much there. And it's so important to, I think, to your message.
100%. And again, and that's what I was saying, like, I mean, all the plastic came up because it's this constant drumbeat of how do we make things faster, cheaper, more disposable. I don't think most people say more disposable, but they do say faster and cheaper. And we hear it too. People are like, how quick can you get this to me? And I'm like, why is that the question? Like, how quick? Like, we're still quick, in big terms, but when you're under those, you're just talking about how do I exploit the inputs? And so that's where plastic came up, because it's like, okay, I can get it faster. And then, now there's the fallacy in the industry that, oh, if you need something that's cleanable, it better be plastic. But that's actually not true. Like, wool is the most easy to clean of anything, but nobody thinks that. Like, I can't tell how many times people are like, oh, well, we have small kids and dogs. So I was like, so you're going to put toxic chemicals on the floor that they're crawling on? Like, all the more reason to get a natural rug, But I understand that everyone's, including me, you think, oh, these aren't going to be good to live with, but they're great to live with. So I don't know. And that's the plastic. I see what happened with plastic, or why we got to that stage. So anyway, I don't know if I think I got kind of sidetracked on your question about plastic, but I had plastic in my mind.
I'm hung up. I'm sorry if this is sort of taking the conversation a bit backwards, but I mean, yeah, I just would love to observe that the manufactured on the other side of the planet in some plant, the only human hands or living being touch involved is probably the guys who are packing these things up and shipping them to the United States for us. Whereas, as you say, like wool and cotton, these are things that used to be living alive, right? and then you sort of overlay the care and the love and the touch of your artisans, your craftsmen, and pulling this together. And surely these objects are imbued with all of that life. And so I think it makes great sense then, as you say, that there's sort of more of a dynamism between the material and your human touch when you're experiencing it. Makes great sense.
Yeah. And think of that care that goes into, I've been lucky enough to go to a few of the spinning mills in Europe, but the care that they're doing, and you go in there and it smells like a farm. You're like, this is amazing. And then even for us, like the wool, you have a sense, you still have that sense of the farm. So it's a very different, people often comment, they're like, oh my gosh, it smells so good. And I was like, I think in bigger factories where there's maybe more chemicals, it doesn't have the same smell. So
we've done such a great job of thoroughly eradicating that from modern life. I mean, I would imagine there's a special attractiveness to people who live in the city, for instance, who like don't even get access to grass and animal interactions. So yeah, so I don't know, like,
or it takes people by surprise. They're like, oh, what's that smell? I'm like, it is exactly what you think it is.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Good.
So
the question, how do we educate people that whether it's architecture or carpeting or a piece of furniture, that you should buy something that is a higher quality or build something that's a higher quality in the beginning that you want to keep for a longer period of time, as opposed to something that's less expensive and made of plastic and is basically a kitsch enjoyment that you're going to throw away. Simply, how do you go back to the 1960s and 70s with the way that our parents looked at clothing, whether it be a beautiful pair of shoes that would get resold, but would cost a fair amount of money in the first place, or to have less clothes that are at a higher quality? How do we teach the world that there's no better green than stopping throwing things away?
I think that is such a great question. I think my starting point is, how do I not think of teaching? Because I would say I've been unsuccessful but how do we invite people to experience something different? Because I think that's different. Like if you just experience a great meal and then you're curious, like, why was that meal so amazing? What was it? You're going to be much more open to like, oh, well, those were actually grown on the farm next door. Then if I started by saying everybody should buy from local people, it's going to taste better, you're going to be happier, right? Believe me, I've tried all this. And people are just like, excuse me, I don't need you to tell me how to live my life, like, which is fair, right? But if you experience it and you kind of come to it so I keep saying to everyone here at Merida, I'm like, our job is just to invite people in and try to create as many experiences. Because if in anything we do, it elicits some curiosity, it's great, because that is your journey, not my journey, right? And so I can accompany you on your journey and you're accompanying me on my journey, but I'm not teaching you. You know what I mean? I might share with you what we know about, making rugs, but so that's I feel like in our whole industry, that is our, and a good example for me, and my mom and my grandmother are both painters. So I grew up with artists. But when I met Sylvie, I would go over a couple times a year to work. And I would come with my spreadsheets and my computer. I'm like, we're going to talk brass tacks. We're going to get this done. And I would no sooner be opening my computer than she'd be like, oh, we have to go. I'm like, what? We haven't even started. Off we'd go, and we'd go to some obscure gallery or museum. And she'd be like, well, just go look at one thing. I'm like, what are you talking about? One thing? And we'd go look at one painting, for example, And we talk about it for half an hour or so. And then she'd be like, okay, let's go back. So then we would talk all the way back. And on the way, we'd notice a few buildings or parks. This is how we work. And we never got to the spreadsheets. And I would leave and I'd be like, oh my God, we didn't accomplish anything. Like, what is happening? And then I started to realize, like, I had everything I needed to do the spreadsheets. And she was never going to help me with the spreadsheets anyway. What I got in return was, ooh, you know, all of a sudden what I was thinking became this. And then it became this. And then I just felt like, oh my God, my life is so different now, because my mind just keeps getting opened and educated, but nobody's teaching, you know. She didn't say to me, you have an impoverished life because you're so focused on all these business things and you're not paying attention to this. She showed me, she invited me in and was patient over time. And so part of me is like, that's the gift that we all have in our industry as architects and designers. People are coming to us because you all know all these amazing things that the rest of us don't know. And so how do we invite people in to start to experience that for themselves? And I'm pretty confident that it'll start to change people a little bit, but you know, wherever they are. And I think David mentioned the food farm to table movement. That's a perfect example where if the farmers, I'll equate myself with the farmer, if they had started by themselves without the chefs and the restaurateurs to create it would have never gotten very far.
I mean, that was only 3 decades ago. Slow food movement started at the steps of at the bottom of the Spanish Steps when a McDonald's opened. And it was a revolt about fast food, about being aware of what you're eating. And to think that in 3 short decades, I think it was 3, the whole world, the majority of the world is aware of things. I mean, it was obviously picked up by amazing chefs throughout the entire process. Alice Waters of the United States, who was involved with it, Dan Barber, and a whole hundreds of chefs that, you know, around. But it all started there at the Spanish Steps, I mean, for the most part. And so why can't we do this in architecture? Go back, and why can't we do this in product design and have people aware of who's making it, child labor laws? Where's my iPhone being made, and is that okay? Like we have to be aware.
But you all, the way I look at it is, if I'm a farmer, y'all are the chefs, right? And so how do we start to work together to just create those experiences for people? Because again, once they come in, because it does evolve changing. Like I can't think of how we'll get where we're going unless we consume less. And I don't know if the same is true, but I imagine in architecture, we're probably going to have to build some smaller houses. I don't know, but I would think like, you know, people say, what, you're a business owner and you're telling people to consume less? And I'm like, yeah, because I mean, but that talk about a radical change, right? So, but the same thing happened like with the farm to table. If you're going to spend $10 for a tomato versus $3 for a tomato, you're going to buy less tomato. I mean, you're going to buy less of something. Like, so
consider that it was, I think, 22 years ago that renowned architect Sarah Sazonka wrote the book Not So Small House. That's probably not exactly right, but that's basically the title. And the basic, this is 22 years ago, and the concept was decide how much money you have, and instead of maxing out the size of the house, first hire a designer that's going to design things that are like well designed and are going to be relevant 10 and 20 years from now, and are cutting edge design methodologies, and then use more enduring materials and build a smaller house. And with that same budget, you'll have a smaller house that works as well as the larger house. And 20 or 30 or 40 years from now, when you resell it, it's going to be worth a lot more because it's going to be enduring. It's going to be resilient. And so the answer is as simple as that. And
the pleasure you're going to get over those 20 years living in something that's extraordinary. It's magnificent.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I don't know. But I think one has to kind of, come along the journey somehow. That's my experience. And again, maybe I'm a really bad teacher and or storyteller, but the preachy just really, really has not worked at all for me.
Well,
I would just say I'm not effective. So
Go ahead.
that's why I love that you start with beauty, because there's no denying that, there's no rationalization that's going to make you fall in love with something. You're just going to do it or not. So I think, you're often that in architecture, at least, that gets mistaken as frivolous and, just sort of superficial, because you're like the name architectural delight. Well, delight can be anything from eating a bonbon to hearing a grand opera. It's the same feeling though. And so that's why sometimes I worry about the distinction between high taste and low taste, only because, we all strive for status and all that, but it negates the fact that we all perceive the world through the similar sensory organs. So the fact that she opened you up to the beauty of a Paris street and a museum and a this and a that, and just made you feel the possibility of that world, I think she probably contributed a lot more than helping you run numbers. And
Right.
so when you transfer that idea into your work, I think that's all we can do, unless we're emperor for a day. All we can do is, reflect the beauty that's everywhere. And then that feeling will draw you to something. I don't know, I'm going nowhere with this, but it makes sense the way you've laid it out on your website. And so hats off to you on that.
Well, and I think, Dan, you said this the other day, and I so relate to this, but for me, beauty is just about like evoking something that moves you.
Yeah.
And that isn't about high or low or this or that. It's just, and it happens to everybody. And I think you also use the word connection. And I think that's what it is. It's a connection to something deeper. And sometimes you don't even know what it is, but it's moving you. And so
the way you described your rugs, and just even the monochrome with all the life that goes on, whether it be through the different looms or whether the way the craftsmen set it up and operate it, that variegation, that sort of irregularity, even within order, I think that's what our minds are very irregular. We all compose ourselves and speak, sentences to be understood, but sometimes it's a bit of a whirlwind in there. And I think when you see that variegation in the natural world, it's like when your baby's really young and he's crying or she's crying, and you take them outside and they immediately calm down. Or, when you're in an office building and the lighting has been all engineered to be perfect everywhere and certain lumens and this and that, and your mind goes berserk because there's no variegation for your mind's natural up and down to harmonize with. So again, I don't know where I'm going with this, but I feel what you're saying, and I hope you try to produce more work into the broader market, because for the earth's sake, it would be good, not just for the high-end clients.
but we would love that.
Yeah.
And I think we talked about this the other day too, but that's my hope too, because I think oftentimes people are like, oh, it's so expensive and et cetera. And yes, however, as it grows and as the ecosystem that supports it grows, and hopefully other people take up the mantle and want to do something similar, that's when you start to be able, to get it to a broader group of people, which would be amazing. Absolutely amazing.
I mean, is there a role for government? I hate to bring politics into this. I'm not trying to at all, but, will only affect a certain, some people would just want that rug right away. They'll go to IKEA, they'll be done, they'll move on, and the world won't be any the less worse for it, except for maybe one more product that can't be decomposed and one more product that goes into the body of the earth and continues to, pollute it like a drug addict might pollute his own body. So looking 200 years down the road, is there something we could do more besides our own little realms? Or do you see the government, or I don't know, anything to help?
I mean, who knows? I will say one thing, whatever you think about the state of California, they have a carpet, it's called the CARE Act, but it's a stewardship thing. So for every rug that we sell into California, we have to pay into this fund, and it's basically for the recycling of the rugs. But I think it's helpful though, in the sense that it's getting people to start to think about all these products have a life. after you're done with them. And I think the fashion industry is starting to do a better job with some of this too. Like, where's all the fashion going? Like, where's all the fast fashion going? But I dream, and this is a really flimsy dream, I think public-private partnerships around education, I think it'd be amazing. And I know they exist, but almost like when they started to build beautiful public libraries, could you build beautiful community centers in and just introduce everyone to beautiful schools, to beautiful architecture, like, again, start to educate through experience. I don't know. I think it can make a big, big difference. And, the one in Fall River, for example, the YMCA, which was the second one built, and it is absolutely the most spectacular building ever, all marble. Imagine 11 stories of a YMCA, all marble. But they service a very impoverished community, and they have schools, and they have a garden on top. And it makes me so happy, though, because kids are coming in there and seeing things that are beautiful. I mean, it's beautiful architecture. It's beautiful. And the government did help. That it cost like $100 million to refurbish the building and they got grants from Massachusetts and the federal government for more than half. And then a lot of businesses in the community contributed for the other part. But I have no doubt that those kids it's going to make an impact on them to go there after school or whatever and be in just an absolutely exceptional space. So I think, I do think things like that could make a huge difference. Versus you go to they're right around our gallery in New York, there's a public school. And if you didn't know it was a school, you might think it was a prison. I mean, if there's like 2 windows, that would be a lot. And I'm always looking and I'm like, this is inhumane. Like, why are we sending kids in Manhattan into this school all day long? So part of me just thinks if we put more care into, I don't know.
The architect got an award for that school.
Really?
I'm kidding. I'm just.
I was like, what?
Probably.
Well, I mean, that's the modern sort of kitsch sculpture design. I mean, you want to get on the sugar high, and everybody loves you, and it's different, and it's half brutalist, and it's half cardboard, and it's not loved, and it falls apart.
I can tell you these children do not look joyful when they come out of this building. And I see them all the time.
So it's interesting, like our big thing, or our big sort of one of our discussions is always, if you can design something that's timelessly designed, it will never go out of style. When I was around looking at all of your beautiful patterns, some of them are more, you could say, are generally more contemporary or more modern, but they're all timeless. And how that to me is the most green concept of all. If we can convince people that what they should be leaving in this earth is timelessly beautiful, and it's not a fad, then I think that's a huge step in the right direction in itself. And I have to then jump, is that when you start to talk about using technology, meaning you're working with your people on the floor to invent and reinvent looms and creating things that like didn't exist or are better or more twist or less twist. I mean, that's about as modern of a concept as you can get. It's a lot better than coming up with the latest colored chemicals from DuPont so that they can build a cheaper carpeting.
Right. Well, and just to give credit to our master craftsmen, they figured out, you use looms have things that hand weaving doesn't have, because you can pack things. You can use the mechanization to pack the rug tighter, but they figured out how to go in the middle of weaving, stop the loom, and hand insert things. And it is magnificent. So you're getting some of the exquisiteness of hand weaving with the power of the loom. And I'm like, that really is like, that feels like innovation, It's timeless. There's hand weaving and the machine, but it's magnificent. And it took forever to figure out how to do it. because, you know, you're inserting something into an otherwise mechanical process and in an irregular pattern. So, but it's cool. It's cool. It's taking the best of what can be helpful, the mechanization, and what's so beautiful about handwork, the irregularity, the hand itself. So, but I agree with you about the timelessness. I think it's so important. I mean, you want longevity. Longevity's the most sustainable thing you could do, is create something that is beautiful over a long period of time.
You're creating these things that are lovable, right? But I have to commend you for the bravery to take on this concept that must be so difficult to convey via the medium that, you know, at least Americans have shifted into the primary sort of mode of existence, and you know, we're living through computers, and you know, how do you convey the richness and the quality only visually at whatever pixelization we have, or just on the phone? And I think it makes great sense that people can see the manufacturing processes on your website and with the videos. I mean, that makes great sense. But is there like another layer that you will need to figure out, because you are, you know, you're delivering heirloom items, so you're not probably going to have too many repeat customers, right? And so you're talking about the challenge of getting, you know, more people direct interaction with your rugs. How do you do that? Like you in your business plan, how, like what's, you know, what is the way in which you know, near term, midterm, I mean, long term, yes, obviously we'll do a new WPA program for sure. That sounds great to me. But, you know, in order to continue to grow,
yeah, that is a great question. The short answer is yes, we need to do lots of more things. I think, to be honest, though, what I've really tried to do, even going into next year, is almost slow down. It's like go slow to go fast. So, and just, I mean, I've always told people I'm taking the long view, but I don't think there's a quick, it's like it is like peeling back the onion. And, you know, we recently did you know, and granted, Merida has been changing a lot. And even for me, I'm the one who's this summer was like, okay, now we're an artisan workshop. But we were like, okay, of our clients, if 10 means they understand exactly what we're doing and 0 means they've never heard of us. But even our best clients are probably a 4 or 5, because we've been evolving so much. So I'm like, let's slow down and let's just take our time and invite these clients who've been amazing clients of ours to come in and see how we can help them in their businesses more too, and start there and let that go, instead of just trying to be like, oh my God, we have to get everybody from 0 to 10, lots of people. Because you're right, it's a process. And we did just open what we're calling a gallery, but a big space in the New York Design Center. And it's everyone's joking, because I keep, like, I'm going next week. They're like, why are you spending so much time in New York? I'm like, because it's like divine. It's like my own hall of mirrors working in there. But you know, just letting people, and even there, we've invited our designer. We're like, come work here, bring your clients, even if you're working on other things, like spend time experiencing it. So
does everyone have to, do we leave our shoes at the door when we come in?
Yes. You don't have to, but you might want to, though. It's nice.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, explain more about where your contact points are. I know you're in Boston and New York, and where else?
So in terms of, we have a gallery in New York, we have a studio in the Boston Design Center, and then we're here in Fall River. And then everything else, we have an amazing business development manager in Los Angeles. And then we really travel, including me. We go to designers' offices and, you know, we do a fair amount, you know, virtually, and then we send samples. But, you know, the preponderance of our business is really California and the Northeast. So it's 80% of our business.
Yeah.
So we're looking forward to expanding to the rest of the United States, but you know, but again, we've tried in fits and starts to conquer everything. And then I'm like, you know what? Let's just be slow and steady and deep. Narrow and deep would be how I would try to describe what we're trying to do. So, so we'll see. Maybe I should get back to my spreadsheets more instead of going to all these museums.
Well, I mean,
No, you go, Dan.
no, I was just going to say it's that balance between, making yourself obsolete by creating such wonderful, long-lasting products. But I think at the end of the day, people want something that's going to last. And I mean, it's just cheaper to have something that lasts, and to be emotionally attached to it, again, resonates in your everyday life when you're surrounded by things. You see sometimes a modern athlete who has a decorator come in and do up their house, and then you see pictures of it, and you look at them and you're like, well, it's a nice composition, but none of that feels like it's a home, and things like that. And again, I don't say that to make a judgment on them or anything, but yeah, I think you just stick with your narrow and deep lane, and just know, just like doing good around the neighborhood, just that's as good as we can do. And when you influence someone else to do something, you've done your greater good. There's not, aside from the state, mandating a tax on crap products to, mitigate the negative effects on them. I think that's all we can do.
Well, and I will say there's a whole group. Dave Dawson from Urban Electric started a Makers Alliance. And there's a whole group of amazing makers, from lights to right down the street is a wonderful ONG studio. They make furniture right near us. David knows them, or maybe you all know them. Matuk is right here. So there, I feel like there's a community of people who are really working to kind of revitalize craft in different states and different industries. And so to your point, I think, and everybody's great neighbors. I mean, every single person in this group would help anybody else out in the group in a second on anything. And that's a kind of an amazing feeling too. So you do feel, it doesn't feel as lonely as I think it would if you were just in your lane, so.
Yeah.
It seems to me, I totally agree that you can't compromise you can't compromise the essence of what anybody is doing on their primary product, the couture, whatever. That's how you're making progress. That's how you're inventing. That's how you're moving forward. The question is that how can you then again get picked up and somehow give that same love to something that will get to the masses, whether you're using your name, whether it be, I don't know, Ralph Lauren and all their different lines is probably not the perfect analogy, although it's a perfect system. You have the purple label, and the purple label is the purple label, and then it goes down to the masses. So they've done it within their actual product line. But there are a lot of examples, whether it be Michael Graves with Alessi and the teapot, where you actually take that and say, somehow I'm going to get some love, and I'm going to be able to get it to the masses. But you can't do it and compromise what you're doing at the top, I feel.
Well, and I'm not sure, we're too early in the stage. But I also think there's a tipping point where you can start to imagine different iterations without compromising the engine that's continuing to go. And again, I know right now we're too small to start to diffuse, but I like to imagine that there's a day when there's enough critical mass that then you can start to imagine, okay, how could you start to do some diffusion lines that gets the same principles out at a more accessible price point. And I mean, certainly mathematically, I can see how that happens. It's just when you have, right now we're expending all of our energy to make sure that we're investing in the engine, so to speak. But I just think if everybody starts asking more questions, that'll change very quickly. Like if people really started to say, what if I didn't want a plastic rug? Like my neighbor next door one day said, can you come over? I bought a jute rug from some mail order. She said, but it doesn't smell right. And I was like, oh my God, it had molded like absolutely 100%. I was like, you have to get rid of this thing like immediately. And she was like, they won't take it back. But what she paid for it, I was like, honestly, I mean, I don't even know, like my packaging costs more than that. Like, I'm not sure how you even got any material here, but you definitely have to throw it away. Like, so anyway, I think it's hard, you know, like if you're in your mind, you're used to something that is so inexpensive. It's hard to, I think that's our first challenge, is just to say, if you think it's super cheap, you know, you get what you pay for. You may want to think about like, okay, maybe that is too cheap for, you know, whatever it is. So, so I do think there's a, some of that's got to change a little bit before we're ever going to be able to really diffuse good. I'm just thinking of good materials out to people. So,
and Wendell Berry is sort of your guru in terms of thinking about, you know, how to be a good capitalist and also, you know, want to see less consumerism, would you say?
yes.
Other resources that you're looking to as guiding lights?
I think if I could be Wendell Berry, I would be very happy, but I guess that job's taken. But I mean, I have lots of people. I would say during COVID, I got particularly taken with a lot of poetry. So, and they all seem to speak in a way, I feel like what we're trying to do is poetry too. It's like we're saying, somebody once said poetry is like saying something that you didn't know you had on your mind. So like I love, well, of course, everyone, well, I don't know if everyone, I love Mary Oliver, but John O'Donohue.
Just the same. Those are my number one. Those are also my number one and number two these days. It must have been COVID. Yeah.
Yes, David White. I mean, there's so many. So, and maybe also poetry helps you realize like you can do things that seem impossible. So, but yeah, there are many other, I mean, even just this week, yesterday, Jimmy Chu, there was an amazing article in the Financial Times. And he was just talking about, I wrote it down. If you look around these days, a lot of craftsmen are slowly disappearing all over the world. And everyone wants to be a designer, but if you don't know the craft, you can't achieve what you want. And I'm like, it's exactly right. And he's getting super involved within the United Kingdom in these, and maybe this is a little bit of these guilds, associations that are trying to create spaces for aspiring craftspeople to come and get some seed capital. And, you know, but I just feel like, yeah, there's lots of people who are starting to really dig in, some super successful like he's been, and saying, hey, if we don't pay attention to this, you know, that ancient conversation is going to stop. So, so I read everything and everybody and widely, let's put it that way. So
I wonder if there are any questions from the audience. There's a Q&A button at the bottom. Feel free to post it up. Love to hear from you. What are your plans for next year? Do you have like, what's over the horizon?
Yeah, well, next year, I think we're really trying to Elizabeth's point, start to really create experiences for people. So we're gonna, we have an exhibition in Paris during Deco Off in January, and trying to, you know, invite people in to experience the rugs. We're gonna go with, you know, trying to create a space for other makers and artists to come speak in our gallery in New York. So, and then we usually put 2 collections out every year, but this year we're going to take the whole year to really hone in on the Atelier collection for next year. So that feels kind of exciting, actually. Again, that's slowing down to take a few extra iterations at things. So yeah, I would say my theme for next year is go slow to go fast. So
that's awesome. So give me the most exciting project that you've ever worked on.
Oh, there are lots of them. It's hard to say. Sometimes the most exciting projects are when it's the first time you work with a designer and they're just like, I just want to put one of these atelier rugs in my client's project. And it's just so exciting that they convince them to put, you know, something that like a work of art in. So I find those particularly exciting. I'll tell you the project I really want to get. I love Annie Albers, and her last piece was a commission she did for a hotel in Mexico City called the Camino Real. And the hotel is called the Camino Real. And I am like, that's what I want to do. We do work a little bit with boutique hotels, but I would like to work with someone in a really fabulous boutique hotel to do an art installation of our rugs, like the Camino Real, because A, they're beautiful, and B, they have amazing sound absorption qualities. So I think it's a way more beautiful way to achieve that than acoustical panels, which I'm not speaking against acoustical panels, but just an alternative. So that's what I'm dreaming of, is really, and that I think that also helps people start to look at textiles in a different way, rugs in a different way. So that's the project I'm dreaming of. I've got a few people in mind, but
it makes perfect sense. Viewing the textile as art. I mean, because you talk about the depth and the different materials. That's shade and shadow. So like that's the essence of great architecture. And then you've got color. And I mean, and you described earlier, I had the opportunity to walk your plant and you look at like the same purple on 5 different or 10 different yarns, and you're like, oh my God, like that's the exact same purple. And then so I think that it would be perfectly appropriate to look at that as art.
so let's see if I can, you'll be the first person I'll share it with when how about I'll say when we're successful. So
we have a couple of questions from Barbara Hirsch. I'd love to hear more about how you got started working with Sylvie and your journey as a maker. Have you thought about publishing a book telling your story?
First of all, that is so nice to even suggest publishing a book. So thank you. And Sylvie, honestly, it's a little bit of a funny story, but we met through a friend, actually. I went to see her and I was absolutely captivated by her, but didn't think anything of it other than like, okay, this is an amazing person. And evidently she felt similarly, and we kept in touch. And then I called her and I was like, let's get coffee. I'm coming to Paris for pleasure, you know, for a vacation. But we only had like a 3-hour window before she left for, you know, they all take off the month of August, all Parisians. So anyway, of course, my flight was delayed. So we missed our meeting. I thought nothing of it. I came to my little hotel and I didn't know this, but they all knew Sylvie. And everybody was like all aflutter. And they're like, you have a package. And I'm like, okay. And out comes this spectacular package. And I'm like, that's interesting. And she had on the most beautiful paper in like her handwriting, which was like calligraphy, written out a strategy for Merida. And at the end, she's like, and I'd like to be your artistic director. And I'm like, what? And my husband was so funny. He's like, well, that's some cup of coffee. Like, so, but that kind of began the conversation. And then I was like, well, and of course in my mind, I'm thinking, this is crazy. She has her own business. She's in Paris. I'm in Fall River. But then I was like, well, why don't you just come to Fall River? So she came and all her friends were telling her, you're crazy. What are you doing? You're so talented. Like, why are you flying to the United States? And so I would say we both just went on instinct against all advice. And we're like, let's give this a go. So I hope I answered the question.
And then could you talk more about the importance of natural fibers and honoring artisans, sustainability, et cetera?
Well, I think I have a good story on that. I do think, well, honoring artisans to me is giving space for creativity, for just as we always talk about, leaving space for people to put themselves in the work. And that could be anything. That could be even, we work with this amazing photographer, Richard Powers. He puts so much of himself in the photography. It's incredible. So So I think that I'd say that the natural fibers, again, I think I was initially attracted to them because of the environment, but I've come to just appreciate, if you study any artisan, the materials that you use are such an important part of your work. And so I think when it's all natural, it's such a treat. And our senior designer is incredibly talented, moved up here from North Carolina. And I remember asking her, Barbara, what made you choose to come work here? And she's like, I couldn't believe that I could have the opportunity in textiles to work with all natural materials. And of course, I was thinking she was going to say, I love the ethos of the company. But it stuck with me. I'm like, that's amazing. So I think that it's also because, at least in textiles, it's so rare, at least in the United States, but I also think there's so much more they can do. So much more of their spirit is in it when the materials are natural than if we were working in synthetic materials. So
That's great. Are there any other questions? Well, Catherine, thank you so much. This has been amazing. And I would recommend anybody, if you've had the opportunity, first of all, you have to go there and see the manufacturing. I'm assuming it's open. I'm inviting people without your permission.
we'd love it. We're open.
And go to the website. The product is to die for. That's like way up high on my list now. I'm going to design with you my first installation, my first rug. So
We'd love that.
So thank you so much. This has been absolutely fantastic. You're just awesome.
Yeah,
thank you all for just your interest. It's been a delight. Not to use
Nailed it.
Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.
Take
Thank you.
care. Bye.
Bye.